when it's your own 30 seconds, it feels like it's really short, and when it's someone else's, it feels like it's going on forever.
Yeah, yeah, the subjectivity of time. So welcome to All Things Quiz and this preview of the Brain of Online Quiz League Tier 1 final, which is happening this weekend. I'm delighted to have all four of the finalists with me. We've got Evan Lynch, Oliver Levy, Phil Small and Jonathan Gibson. Welcome, guys.
Well, nice to be here.
So just a quick intro for the benefit of people who might not know who you are. Evan, we'll start with you. Evan is a 3-time Mimir Well winner, and really you've prospered over lockdown in this format, Evan. But tell us a little bit more about your quizzing background.
So I started quizzing at university, joined the quiz society there, and went on University Challenge, didn't do too well, and then decided to use that as motivation to put some work in, and then just moved on, started playing Quiz Bowl, which I've done for about 6 years now. And then joined Nomads in the QLL and just moved up through the formats since then and tried to do as much as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Oliver, this is not your first Mimir final of the COVID era. Hopefully, from your perspective, it might be your first win, but tell us a little bit more about your quizzing background.
I've been sort of in and around and about quiz since probably late teenage years. I used to go to kind of fundraising quizzes and things with my parents, and ever since then I've been picking up facts, and probably best known as one of the winners on series 44 of Perfection with Nick Knowles.
Who can forget it?
I certainly can't. That 1,500 quid did come in very handy. I'm hoping to double that in the forthcoming Mimir.
Fantastic. Moving on to Jonathan. Jonathan, people might have seen a previous interview with Jonathan when he won Mastermind this year. But Jonathan, Mimir is a new thing for you, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about your background and how you found playing BOOQL.
Okay, so I started quizzing, I suppose, in school. I did quite a lot of buzzer quiz back at school. I did a bit of Quiz Bowl at university, not all that much. I'm beginning to do a bit more of it now. But I really started getting into quizzing properly by doing Grand Prix and things like that after leaving university. I'm now a member of the Dietologists in OQL, and I've been doing a few Mimir competitions since lockdown started. I did a couple of seasons of Mimir as well, and I did the highbrow and lowbrow tournaments earlier this year for OQL. But this is my first ever Mimir final, and apart from Mastermind, which is obviously a very different sort of format in many different ways, it's my first circuit individual final ever, so I'm quite excited.
And thank you. Last but not least is Phil. Phil is the reigning champion of BOOQL, a trailblazer back last year. Phil, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, yeah, my quizzing background isn't quite as established as the other guys. I don't think it's not something that I was really involved in until a few years ago. So I didn't do any sort of university quizzing or anything like that. I just started doing pub quizzing about 10 years ago. Just quite casually, and then maybe a little bit more seriously, going a bit more frequently. And then, sort of coincidence. I had to stop playing sport and such like, had a bit more free time. And I also went for an audition for Only Connect about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, maybe. And it was actually there that they told us, I was kind of like the third wheel in the team. And the producers told us that there was actually, a quiz circuit and quiz leagues and such like, which I knew nothing about at the time. So that was sort of the start of it for me. I decided to sort of, dip my toe in the water to see if I could find, something a bit more challenging than your average pub quiz, and ended up joining QLL 4 years ago. So I've just played through 4 seasons of QLL. So this is year 5, I guess I'm starting now in quizzing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Great to have you here. BOOQL started with a qualifying competition, a written quiz, and you all managed to make it into the top tier off the back of that, which meant that you were playing people of similarly kind of high standard. Were there any matches en route to the final that were particularly testing, or any performances that stood out against you? Oliver, what about you?
Oh, definitely the last one, coming up against not just Evan, but Ian, I want to say Ian Toms, yeah, and Ian Bailey as well. So that was a pretty tough. And Hugh Bennett was in the game as well. Mm. That was really difficult. So it was, especially as the questions were at quite low level, I thought. So it was more a case of not making mistakes, and just a case of who held their nerve the longest. So I didn't, by any stretch, know as much as any of the other contestants. I just managed to just not guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of holding your nerve, and we were talking before we started recording about whether there are tactics, whether there aren't. But sometimes keeping quiet is the best option. Jonathan, how did you find it working your way through to the final?
Well, I mean, all my games have ended up on really tight score lines. I came into tier 1 with quite a relatively low rank within that division from the qualifier, so I felt like I might be going in slightly out of my depth. And I've come up against some incredibly strong players along the way. Ian Toms, Paul Sinner, Phil, Ian Norris, David Harris, Nick Paul, all people with incredible range who really know this format very well. And in fact, I mean, the sort of funny thing about me being in the final is that I haven't actually won a match yet. I've gone through as runner-up every single time. I lost to Paul Sinner in first round, then to Ian Toms in the second round, and to Phil in the semi-final. So I'm looking forward to trying my luck in the final. I would be amazed if I won this one, but we'll see what happens. This format can throw up surprises, and I'm going to do my best.
And when you put it like that, you reel off names like Ian Toms, Paul Sinner, etc., Nick Paul. Fantastic standard of competition. Phil, who were the toughies that you came up against on your run to the final?
Well, I played Paul Sinha as well in the quarterfinals. So, obviously, one of the sort of preeminent quizzes in the UK the last few years. So, always very challenging. But I just think the quality is, it's so extensive. I mean, I won last year, and I say this with the greatest respect to everybody I did play last year. But I think if you look at the two competitions, this one is so much harder to progress in, due to the sort of depth and breadth of opponents that you have. Everybody is just really good. I think getting to the final was probably at least has equivalency to getting the win last year, if not a greater achievement.
Interesting. And now, Evan, you've had probably more experience of playing Mimir than anybody else, maybe even on the circuit full stop. How does this competition compare to something like Mimir as well?
It's an interesting comparison. Yeah, I think probably the difference between the two competitions has been that, as Ollie was alluding to, in the semi-final, you definitely just had to play no mistake quiz, really, if that's a term. And I think in MIM as well, sometimes you're able to get away with a mistake because there's likely to be some incredibly difficult international quad that you have a chance of Xing out and saving them. But here, it was, I think in the semi-final, I was going into the final round down on a bonus attempt, and I knew that I needed to find that from somewhere, and it wasn't guaranteed that it was going to show up, and fortunately it did.
And that semi-final, and Ollie's talked about it, Ian Toms, who has been awesome across multiple formats in the last 15, 18 months. Hugh Bennett, who's such a brilliant quiz bowl player. I think that wouldn't be an unfair categorization, but very, very strong quizzer, full stop. And then you two, what a monstrous semi-final to be in. Did it turn on just that odd answer here and there and that odd choice of whether to go for a bonus or not?
Absolutely. So yeah, going into round 5, I think everyone had 2 bonus attempts, and I had 1, which shows, usually you'd hope for a few more by that point. But then I think the way the final round played out was that I think Ian made a mistake, which let me get that bonus point back, and then after that, everyone converted their own questions, and that's sort of the cruelty of Mimir, really, in that you just make that one error, and there's nothing you can do because no one lets you have a way back in. And I had to go into the tank on one of my questions and come up with the answer eventually, and yeah, that made the difference, really.
Ollie, do you feel the pressure in those situations going into round 5?
Not really. As long as you've played with some amount of discipline all the way through the match, I find that hopefully my lack of bonus attempts eventually kind of comes back to as its own reward. So I try and get in like a good position for the last round where I can be relatively near the front of the queue for some of the answers. But obviously that was of no use in this match where basically everyone got all of their questions right.
Yeah, both semi-finals had very few X's. The other semi-final, Jonathan and Phil's, you had Amit D, who absolutely destroyed me in my first round, and Tim Hall, who's been doing, I think, very, very well in Quarantine Virtual Quiz League and other tournaments. How was that one as a competition? Was it a very tight affair?
Well, it was quite an interesting one because I sort of did the opposite of Oliver's very sage advice just now, because I had a few bonus attempts very early on, and they were correct bonus attempts. They were things that I should have gone for, but they meant that I was quite far ahead after the first 3 or 4 rounds, but right at the back of the queue, and actually completely messed up my own questions towards the end. So it ended up with a much tighter final score line, and Phil, in fact, doing very well in the last couple of rounds and coming up to overtake me, whereas I had been quite far ahead early on. But that's one of the fun things that this format can throw up, and really I think in general across this series I've been fairly happy with my bonus game. Like I think my instincts for which risks are worth taking and which ones aren't has been fairly spot on, and it's certainly been more spot on than my performance on my own questions. But yeah, absolutely in a game, as Evan and Oliver have said, in a game where pretty much everyone is just having an incredible batting average on their own questions, being good on bonuses really isn't enough, and I'll probably need to find another gear above what I've been having in the last few games if I want to compete in the final. It's
strange because the kind of polarity of difficulty in that last match, there seemed to be a bit of a jump between most of the quads, which were quite accessible, and then there were like maybe 3 or 4 that were difficult. And I think it may have helped me as a kind of mid-ranking quizzer, because at no point did I flatter myself into thinking that I could go for any of the more difficult bonuses. I just managed to keep a clean nose and then not beat myself up when the answer turned out to be something I'd never heard of. And sometimes that can be all the difference.
Yeah, Phil. So you, based on what Jonathan said, you came through in the latter stages then of your semi-final. You kept your powder dry. Similar sort of reasons to others.
Bits of that, yeah. I mean, exactly the same thing happened in the quarterfinal as well, and I think that's because of the way the questions are randomised. I've played seat 4 in every match so far, and I think seat 4 seems to get its hard questions first and its easy questions at the end. And so I often find myself just sitting there in despair, thinking these guys are like 9 out of 9, and all their questions have been easy, and I'm on 4 or something. And in fact, I mean, if you looked at, I think going into the final, my set of questions in round 4, in the semi-final, I was 6 points behind Jonathan. And I think I was the only player who wasn't in double figures. I think I was at least 4 points behind everybody else in the quarterfinal, but then I didn't get anything else wrong. And I'd also kept my powder dry to pick up bonuses as well. So I think I scored 8 points and 7 points respectively in those last, 2 rounds to come through and win both of them. One thing I'd say that's different in the final, though, is that there was a point, because of the way things fell, Jonathan was 5-0 up over me before I'd even asked a question in the semi-final, because he'd taken 2 bonuses, and one of which I would have got, but I opted not to go for. And then he got 3 of his own. So I'm 5-0 down. And I think I was even further behind at whatever point. And I made the decision not to play him. I was playing the other 2 at that point because I only need to come second. So my decisions from that point on about whether or not to take a bonus were really geared around who was next in line. And I actually passed one that I would have got because I was 80%, but I knew it was only Jonathan or an X that was going to happen if I passed it. And I didn't care which of those it was, because I wasn't really playing. I wasn't trying to play him at that point. I was trying to play Tim and Amit. And okay, it concertinaed back together. But, in the final, you can't do that because second place is nothing. So, you do have to think about things a little differently.
Evan, with your experience, do you find it easy to be that clear thinking about kind of the match situation and what you go for or what you don't go for? Or are you just playing each question on its merits?
I spend a lot of time thinking about what the bonus situation is like and what it's likely to evolve to. There's been situations where, as Phil and Jonathan alluded to, you get like several bonus attempts ahead of the field. You can be 3 or 4 clear, but then like that really doesn't mean anything until people start dropping their own questions, because you get to a point where in round 3 or 4 you're just sat there and someone can go for 6 points in a round, and you get a little more confident when you get into round 5 because of you hope that there's some increasing quads, and it can be the case where you jump out to this lead because people are a bit overcautious at the start or they make mistakes, and the questions are hopefully easy enough that you can make the correct decisions. But there's definitely been times where I've had to pass a risky bonus attempt in round 5 with the hope of it coming back later, and then you just get shut out sometimes. There's nothing you can do. So it's not easy. There's a lot of trusting your instincts, but that's what makes it so much fun.
Well, very competitive. I mean, all 4 of you have done outstandingly well to get to the final. There were an awful lot of people who put themselves up at the outset for the qualifier. It's been hard fought to get here. What were the questions that en route to the final, were there any that you were particularly pleased about getting, whether it was a bonus attempt or something you fished from the back of your mind? Jonathan, is there anything that comes to mind on that?
Well, I think there have been a couple of questions that have made me happy to get, not because they were particularly hard, but just because they were the sort of questions in areas, particularly sport, that I just wouldn't have bothered even listening to like a year ago. It would just have been instant passes. So things like Gianluca Vialli being player manager for Chelsea after Ruud Gullit at the end of the 90s, or Katharina Witt, the German East German figure skater, just people whose names wouldn't even have been in my database, even deeply buried a year ago. And I think having made a bit of a conscious effort to get some sort of sport knowledge and not just have to instantly write off 2 out of 15 of my own questions at the start of every match, that's something that I feel has been a sort of tangible improvement in my game. And whether it will make any difference in the final against sort of players of these caliber, I'd be very surprised. But nonetheless, that felt like that felt like a personal something that I was personally happy about as an improvement.
Yeah. And
also, the bonus attempt that I was happiest to pick up, because it was quite a big gamble, was Rodney Dangerfield, because that was like a 30-40% gamble just on the basis that it sounded sort of right, and it was, and I think I kind of read the position of the other players and gambled in the moment that it was worth going for and it wouldn't really mess me up that much even if I got it wrong, and I went for it and I got it right. So that's probably the individual answer that I'm happiest with.
I see a grin of recognition from Ollie there.
Yeah, no, that question came to my seat, and absolutely gutted not to get Rodney Dangerfield, I have to admit.
Phil, how about you? What are the questions that stick in your mind?
Yeah, nothing particular, to be honest. I think my sort of psychology with quiz is that I spend most of my time obsessing about what I don't know, and just kind of like shrugging off anything I do, which I think because I know it, I assume it's not that interesting or worthy. So I rarely leave a quiz feeling like I've got great answers. I normally just think about the ones that I've stuffed up, which have been rather too many, even in this competition for my liking.
I think that's quite a common thing, isn't it? Evan, how have you found it? Any questions? Have any of you musketeered? Evan, you must have got a few over your time. Did any in this competition?
I don't think so. I think it's incredibly difficult to get a musketeer, not only because of the bonus situation, but also there's usually someone who interrupts it. Usually on the final one of the four comes up with a brilliant answer. I think in terms of actual questions of my own, I spent a bit of time in the semi-final between while other people were thinking, wondering where the quad on the second Baron's Wall was going. And we'd had Lewis and Evesham, and then I thought, okay, what are you actually going to set here? And I was certain there were two more things that were going to come up, but I couldn't remember what one of them was. Only that I had a very strong inkling that there were two topics, and one was the Mise of Amiens, and the other turned out to be the Kenilworth Castle question, but it just wasn't coming. But I spent the time and recalled Amiens, and then was very pleased for it to fall to my seat. And then in the final round, I got the question on the opera about Anna Nicole Smith, which is probably an opera that you'd say probably isn't in the known for being in the repertoire, and I got a bit confused. And then spent a long time thinking about what it could possibly be. I had to make sure it wasn't going to be something like Jenny McCarthy. And then I just got this very strong feeling that it was going to be Anna Nicole Smith, and took the gamble. But I don't think I would have gone for that on a bonus attempt ever.
That was the question that actually edged me past Jonathan. I think that was one of yours, wasn't it? And I did take it on a bonus, which. Don't know that it says a great deal about me, but I was, pretty confident on that one.
Ollie, were there any questions that stand out for you?
Oh, that Anna Nicole Smith question. I was really glad that Evan could remember her name, because I was absolutely getting frantic trying to remember it. So you saved me looking very foolish.
Yeah. It's agonizing, isn't it? And that 30 seconds that you have or somebody else has, and then you're waiting for the bonuses and you think it's there and you can't quite fish it out or decide, it can be absolutely agonizing. And then you're also having to make a decision about whether you go for a bonus whilst trying to agonize it. It's a difficult format. When
it's your own 30 seconds, it feels like it's really short, and when it's someone else's, it feels like it's going on forever.
Yeah, the subjectivity of time. So those are that's the build-up. I won't ask you to kind of talk about your own prospects for the final. We know that depending on the quads and depending on how everybody plays, it can play out in many different ways. But if you had a choice of one quad or topic that could come up that would be your dream quad, what would it be? Jonathan?
I mean, honestly, I struggle to think of any possible quad that I could have to myself with this standard of competition. But I mean, I'm generally hoping for some hardish old films, some kind of hard British political history, and easy sport and science is my sort of tactical choice.
Nice. Phil, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would generally say something to do with sports. It tends to be the area that I'm strongest in relative to other quizzes. But I know that Evan is all really good at sport as well. So my stock answers of like cycling or basketball probably bad choices in this particular instance. So maybe some other niche sport, triathlon, women's triathlon, something like that. That would be perfect.
Evan, how about you?
Probably entirely the opposite of what Jonathan says. I think it would be that sounds like a quiz that would not go amazingly well for me. But I think I don't expect degree level science questions here, but I think one can always dream. And beyond that, some art or literature that I can grind out is always good value for points, I think. So let's stick with that.
And Ollie, you strike me as somebody who would have some nice niche interests. What are you looking out for?
The subjectivity of time. maybe something about simulacra, or the spectacle. I don't know. Something a bit weird. Some abstract noun.
Well, I hope you get at least some of what you're all looking for in the final. All we can hope for is that you all do yourself justice and you pick up what you should be picking up. So I want to wish you all the very best of luck, and we'll be watching with great interest when it gets broadcast on Sunday. But for now, thank you very much for your time and good luck, everybody.
Thanks,
Gareth.
Thank you.